Thank you so much for joining us here this morning for our ONlit Important Canadians launch party. Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge that ONLIT's work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work on this land, and we are thankful to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people for their care for and teachings about the earth. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and to the ancestral lands on which we learn, work, and live. And just a little bit about ONLIT as well. So we are a collaboration between Dyslexia Canada and IDA Ontario. And funding for ONLIT is provided by the Ontario Ministry of Education. So this is a ministry-funded project. Dyslexia Canada, IDA Ontario, they work together. We have this wonderful team, and this project today that we're going to talk to you about is very much a team effort. We do want to note the disclaimer that views expressed are the views of ONLIT and do not necessarily reflect those of the Ministry of Education. Our agenda for this morning, I'm going to give you a background on how the Important Canadians unit came to be. Catherine Shawana is here to talk a little bit about the sensitivity reading piece of our texts. I'll give you a peek at what the unit actually looks like. Nellie Caruso and Leigh Fettes are going to give you a little crash course PD session on vocabulary and comprehension that I think you'll really enjoy. And then we'll just finish up by showing you how to access the unit. So it is not yet on the ONLIT site, but by the end of this hour, it will be there. We will be giving you the link. You will be able to jump in and look at it before the hour is up. And then we'll have some time, hopefully, at the end for questions. So why did we create this unit? We wanted to have another option for K1 teachers to have rich read alouds. And it's interesting, there have been several studies done that have shown that teachers tend to gravitate towards the fiction, the narrative text, when they're doing read alouds. And it's funny because when I reflect on that, I think in kindergarten, I feel like I do a lot of both. But the data shows that for most teachers, that's not the case. And so we also wanted to make sure we were giving a nonfiction option to educators. That doesn't mean we should fully swing and start doing, tons of nonfiction, more so than narrative. Just try to have a good mix of both in your program. And this is a nonfiction example. It will help to build knowledge. So we've got some literacy knowledge that we're trying to build here, as well as social studies knowledge, vocabulary building, and Canadian content as well. Oh, and I should mention, because it's always a question that comes up, yes, we are recording. There will be a video for this. And yes, the slides will be provided in some format or another when we are done as well. We base this unit on CKLA. So that is Core Knowledge Language Arts. They are free open source online units for kindergarten through grade 8. And they are excellent for their science. So in kindergarten, I use a lot of their science units. There's plants and taking care of the earth, and there's one on animals, and there's the 5 senses, and all sorts of really great ones. But I find with their social studies, it's very, very American based. And even the things that are broader than American, it's the American lens. So we wanted something that was going to focus on Canada. CKLA in pre-K, they have a unit called Important People in American History. And so that's why we thought maybe we could have something that's along the same sort of lines, but that has to do with Canadians. And CKLA has 2 important components to these read aloud units. So there is the teacher read aloud piece. So we have done these as Google Docs that you can print off, and you have the text that you will read aloud to the students. And then there are accompanying slideshows that we've done as Google Slides, so they could be opened up and projected. So there's a large image being shown to the kids, no text, while the educator is reading the text piece aloud. Now, big question. We chose 10 Canadians. Why these 10 Canadians? So we want to make it really clear we are not whatsoever saying that these are the 10 most important Canadians. We know that there are almost an infinite number of possibilities for important Canadians that we could choose. We just narrowed it down to 10, and we did have a lot of things that we considered when we were doing this. Before we even started this, I think this was maybe in the winter of 2023, there was a call out on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, to ask people, if we do such a unit, who would you suggest? So we gathered all of that input to begin with. We wanted diversity in a lot of different ways. So we tried to reflect races, genders, their fields of influence, time period, location. So sometimes we'd be thinking, okay, well, we'd like to have another person that identifies this way. Okay, but they're an athlete. We've already got a couple athletes. We don't want kids to think that you have to be an athlete to be important. There are all sorts of other ways you can be important too. So we really tried to balance out all of those factors. Some are from history, some are still living, balancing that out. And even location in Canada, a lot of things can be Ontario centric, and certainly we have some from Ontario, but we have others from other places in the country as well. We also wanted to think about the appropriateness of their contribution for a K1 audience. So a lot of people that are doing activism in certain areas or that are involved in certain sectors, their contributions might be extremely important to our country, but not necessarily something that would make sense to be talking about in K1 as well. So we kept that in mind. And another really important one, we have all sorts of suggestions of people that are maybe a little less known. And it would be really great to kind of amplify their voices and what they're doing. But the problem is, if they're really unknown, it might have been difficult to access enough information that we needed. And also, you might think that if you just reached out, people would give information. But we found with the 10 that we did, it wasn't always the case. So we couldn't count on that piece. So we needed to be able to, online, find enough information to create these lessons, but also to be able to find photos that we would be able to use, with copyright permission and that sort of thing to fill in the images for the slideshows. So again, somebody who, we may not have heard of yet and who we would love for our kids to hear about, I might not have been able to, or we might not have been able to get all of the images that we needed for them too. So that's why you may find there are some familiar names that, there are other books, so there are other things that educators could use, but that also means that there was information we could draw from when we were creating these lessons. The 10 that we chose, and again, this is for now, we can absolutely, add to this list and make this even a more robust unit. But we started with these 10 for now. Give me a moment just to look. So in terms of how people identify there, we also do have an animal, because we thought when we were talking about K1, the story Juanita there might be a good one to tell too, because it gets into a little bit of, the history of war and that sort of thing, but at an age appropriate level. The goals of this unit. So we wanted to have a literacy kind of based goal. So we want kids to develop an understanding of the components of biography. So you'll find in all 10 lessons, there's the same structure where we do an introduction, we talk about background, we talk about challenges, we talk about achievements, we talk about, we get to the conclusion at the end. And each time there's a little, not a footnote, a side note, where the educator can define the conclusion is where the reading wraps up at the end. Or, challenges are when someone faces difficult things that they have to. And so the more lessons you do, the more times kids are going to hear the definition of those headings as well, just to help them kind of understand how, when we write about someone in biography, what those different sections might mean. By the end of the unit, we want kids to be able to name several important Canadians and describe their contributions, and to describe character traits of people who have positively impacted our country and connect that to their potential to impact their community too. And so that's where this social studies piece comes in. A little bit later on, we'll be showing you a front matter document that is in the folder along with those 10 lesson folders, and just talking a little bit about sort of the links to social studies. And the writing process of this was that we reflected on those components of biography. So we knew that for each of these individuals that had been chosen, we wanted to find information to fill in all of those sections. ChatGPT was a great help for that, but we also learned that you have to be very careful about ChatGPT, and that is where our proofreading and fact checking came in. So ONlit team member Erica Chesnick isn't able to be with us this morning, but she had the job of doing that proofreading and fact checking. And a lot of times it was maybe a detail here, a detail there, and just refining things. But one funny story was she sent me a message when she was doing the Roberta Bondar lesson. And she said, Kate, I can't find anything anywhere about Roberta Bondar having been a professional ballet dancer before, going into her current work. And do you know where that came from? And I said, well, I think that was from the ChatGPT. Let me dig in. We'll find out where that source was. There was no source, and to our knowledge, Roberta Bontar was never a professional ballet dancer before she entered her current career. So sometimes ChatGPT can be very wrong. So it was very much helpful to get the framework of some of our facts, but then we definitely did we did check those too. Something else we thought about was sensitivity reading for this, and I'm going to turn things over to Catherine Shawana now, just to give you a little bit of a background on what we did there.
Thank you so much, Kate. For those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Catherine Shawana, and I'm a member of the curriculum assistant team here on ONlit. So, as we are compiling these important Canadians and we're doing some of the reading, we want to make sure that, as Kate mentioned, that the resources and the images are vetted to make sure the authenticity is there and they're genuine. So, a couple of things with sensitivity reading is, first of all, the idea of identifying as Canadian. I'll touch base with that in a little bit, and the content of the First Nation lessons. So, just to give you some examples here. So, in the lesson of Tom Longboat, I think it's important to know that that lesson and that content was read by one of the family members, which Kate had reached out to. So when in those situations, we want to make sure that we are reaching out to family members um, just for that confirmation of the resources and the information that we're presenting to Ontario teachers. Another example would be Saint Kateri was vetted by myself with the following suggestions. Obviously, she's from a time she's no longer with us, and it would be very challenging to go back and vet some of those things. But we want to be mindful of, for example, the wording related to the impact of settlers, things like ensuring that the graphics are accurate and they represent the specific First Nation community and our nation. We want to acknowledge that there are over 600 First Nations communities, for example, in Ontario alone. So, and acknowledge that she lived on the land that we now know as Canada, and we don't want to assume how she would have identified regarding her citizenship. And we acknowledge that First Nation individuals and communities have been on these lands for a time immemorial, thousands of years before Canada or yet US became countries. So we respect that the land is a source of identity, and traditional territories truly stretch across Turtle Island and reflect sovereign nations. So those resources, Ontario teachers, we want to ensure you that they have been vetted and authentically and genuinely represented. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And now we will give you a little peek at what the unit looks like. So to tour the front matter, um, there's some backstory, some goals, and some social studies connections. And I'm actually going to just switch tabs here and just kind of scroll through. So when you go into the folder for the Important Canadians unit, there will be one kind of standalone document in there, which is Important Canadians Front Matter. And our amazing graphic design person, MJ, has a little flair on this because that is not my forte. You can see team-wise, we've got myself and Nellie and Leigh and Erica and Catherine all participating in this. Johnny Longmire is not an ONlit member, but I do want to give him a shout out because he is a Trent University Faculty of Ed student who did an alternate prac with me in the spring of 2023 to help get this going and get this show on the road. So he gets a little credit there too. We have the language from Core Knowledge Foundation, basically saying, yep, you're allowed to copy them and make something that follows what they have done. But we just put the language in there to say they don't necessarily endorse the book. But the inspiration is in here. We have talked about. In terms of specific social studies, some people might be thinking, okay, I teach grade one. What specific expectations am I going to be able to check off? This unit is a little broader than that. And I really love this quote from book Teaching Disciplinary Literacy in K-6 by Lupo and colleagues. We should be wary of ceding too much curriculum design power over to standards documents in social studies, however. Why? Because social studies is such a broad discipline, standards documents often omit important events and people. Further, some of what they include can be deeply problematic, such as focusing almost exclusively on white men and history standards. Teachers must also pause to question what additional content is needed to prepare their students for civic life, connect to their students' lived experiences, and fill in the gaps of the standards. Teachers might instead focus on a worthwhile social studies goal that will then allow them to incorporate relevant standards. And so what we were looking at here was, we've already talked about the goals, but talk about how it connects to the Ontario Social Studies curriculum. So I had the handy document here, Social Studies 1 to 6, History and Geography 7, 8. But we dug into the front matter. And I need to give Dr. Jamie Matsala from St. Vincent University a lot of credit here, because we went back and forth a lot as we were starting this unit, and she gave some great advice sort of about looking at that front matter, looking at where social studies goes throughout the years, and then how do we kick that off well content-wise in kindergarten. So I'm not going to go through each of these points, but there are a lot of different places. These are all from, quoted right from the social studies document. There's a section about the goals of social studies, the framework, like the identity category really fits in here in terms of students' connectedness to local, national, global communities, their civic self-image, considering respecting others' perspectives, investigating moral and ethical dimensions of developments, events, and issues, fostering civic engagement, building positive relationships with diverse individuals and groups. So all sorts of these big ideas are really going to spread us with our content. And then even specifically into the heritage identity strand of the curriculum and concepts of social thinking, the idea of significance. So it says in the front matter of the curriculum document, this concept requires students to determine the importance of something. Students come to understand that significance often depends on the context or the situation. So when we're talking about important individuals, that certainly does start to dig into what significance means. And then there are other areas of alignment here. So if you're looking for that curriculum connection piece, it's there. And then the acknowledgement section in terms of where some of our imaging came, things like that. So that is our front matter. And then when you will eventually go into the Google folder, you don't have access to it yet, the front matter will be there. You'll see the 10 subfolders for each important Canadian. Each one you click on, so you click on David Suzuki, there's a document with the teacher read aloud piece, and there are slides for student viewing. And we decided deliberately to keep these live as Google Docs and slides, because they're kind of still in beta until everybody starts using them in their classrooms. So we do have an email address at the end if there is a typo, a factual error that you find, that we will be able to then tweak that piece. And here's what a lesson would look like. Here's the top of the Tom Longboat lesson, for example. So they all have the exact same sections: introduction, background, etc. You see a little side note that tells you after you read the introduction, there's little number 1. The introduction is where we learn who or what the reading is all about. And so if you do all 10 of these lessons over time, the kids will have heard that 10 times, and hopefully they will have a clear idea of what an introduction would be. And then the teachers can just read the verbatim docs. And here's what the slides would accompany them would look like. So for example, here's the title slide for the Haley Wickenheiser. And I do want to give some shout outs. Some people were so helpful. Wendy Frick from the Terry Fox Foundation was really helpful. Cindy Martin is a relative of Tom Longboat, who was helpful as well. And then Haley Wickenheiser personally herself was amazing. I was sitting with my husband at dinner one night and said, "Oh, sorry, just a second. I just got an email from Haley Wickenheiser, so I have to get this," because she was amazing she read through the lesson herself, suggested some, things that she'd like to see added and whatever, which was amazing. If Canadian children are going to be learning about her, it's wonderful that she had some say in what they'll be learning. And she also gave access to folders and folders of photos that we could just use. And in some cases, it was really hard. We actually had to purchase some images for some of these units. But in this case, she was amazing. So that was really fun. And this is what a title slide would look like. Again, thank you so much to MJ, who did the graphic design for these. When I did them, the title slide was just plain white through a slide that said Haley Wickenheiser on it. And this is what she turned it into. It's amazing. So not only do we have the reading, but after the reading, we have lesson components for you. And I'm going to turn things over now to Leigh Caruso and not Leigh Caruso. I just named them a couple. Leigh Fettes and Nellie Caruso, who worked on the vocabulary and comprehension pieces for these lessons, which was a ton of work too, a major part of this team collaboration. And they are going to walk you through how that works and how you can use it.
as we dig into the unit a little bit. So as Kate said, after every text that's read aloud with images being projected, there are 2 sections for follow-up work. First, there's a series of comprehension questions, and then explicit vocabulary work, which includes a routine as well as some additional activities. So we're going to be showing you some samples in a moment from a variety of different individuals and sections from the unit. But first, and many of us have seen this many times, we felt that we'd be missing a key piece if we didn't mention Scarborough's reading rope, which many of us recognize as that key foundational model, or one key foundational model of reading acquisition. And so the work that students engage in with this unit is really heavily focused on that language comprehension strand, that top broad strand, because you'll see the unit has students really working to build background knowledge, vocabulary knowledge, as well as inferencing skills, and of course, learning about language structures through a lot of oral work. And the rope really helps us to recognize and to remember that these competencies are all interdependent, right? It's really hard, especially to separate vocabulary learning from building background knowledge, just as an example. And we also know that this is tightly connected, not just to strand C of the new Ontario language document, which is comprehension, but also supports learning in other strands as well. So for example, strand B's focus on oral communication, as well as strand D, where students, learn to apply their knowledge of oral language to learn and express ideas and create texts in a variety of different ways. So we really just wanted to ensure that we make that connection both to how proficient reading evolves and grows and develops over time, as well as how this unit is going to connect to the new language document.
So we're going to begin by looking at the why of the comprehension questions. So the work around reading comprehension in this unit is very content focused. So we know that students are being taught foundational reading skills, word recognition skills throughout the day in different areas. This allows us to guide them to dig more deeply into content through questioning, discussion, reflection, all orally and in the context of listening to rich text. After the educator portion, that read aloud document, we've included a number of comprehension questions, and we directly followed the CKLA model. But of course, as always, you can tweak and adjust to suit your learners. So for example, we included the prompt, please continue to model the think, pair, share process for students, and as necessary, and scaffold students in their use of that process midway through the comprehension questions portion. Recognizing, of course, that educators will likely have been doing that all along, having students share their answers with each other. But that's what the CKLA format is, so that's what we followed. We've included a mix of question types, including literal, meaning that the answer can be found right in the text itself, such as these examples that we've got here for you on Hayley Wickenheiser. So what are 2 careers that Hayley Wickenheiser has held? And playing on a national team means representing a country by playing on their team. Hayley played on our national hockey team for over 20 years. What country did she represent? And again, these answers are found directly in the text. As educators, we might return to that part of the text and reread with our students and provide them with a sentence starter. We might also clarify some of that vocab from the question. So for example, we might ask, what are 2 careers or jobs that Hayley Wickenheiser has held? And the other type of question that we've included are inferential and or evaluative questions, such as the example shown here for Oscar Peterson. Oscar's sister taught him how to play piano when he was 5 years old. How did he continue to improve or get better? Kate, you can advance that, please. Thank you. And Oscar Peterson was known for his generosity. How can you show generosity? These questions have students go beyond the literal to read between the lines and to make those personal connections by drawing on their own knowledge and experiences. Again, these questions can be tweaked for your students and can be answered independently or through think, pair, share. So after the comprehension questions, we move into vocabulary or word work. But before we share some of the examples from that, we wanted to touch on the why of this part. And again, think back, of course, to Scarborough's reading rope. We know that background knowledge and vocabulary, particularly those tier 3 words, which we're going to go into as a bit of a review momentarily, are so tightly interwoven that it's hard to address one without the other. But additionally, we've also chosen words that can help to create networks of word meanings and that will support comprehension and learning about our multiple important Canadians, or the tier 2 words. And we're going to review those just momentarily. But first, we just wanted to remind you about how important this vocab building is for a child. So vocabulary building plays an important role in learning to read. It is said that comprehension and vocabulary go hand in hand. Strong and well-developed vocabulary knowledge sets the stage for strong and efficient reading comprehension. And a bit more tightly linked to the quote you see here, vocabulary trajectories tend to be set early in a child's life, much like other reading and language trajectories. The size of a student's kindergarten vocabulary is predictive of their reading comprehension in the junior and intermediate years.
I'm just going to go ahead and read this slide. To establish strong, lasting representations of word meanings, students need to have repeated exposures to new vocabulary in supportive contexts. And so we've included this here just as a reminder of how important it is for us to be providing that robust vocabulary instruction. And then in thinking about this idea of repeated exposures, we thought we'd mention how you might consider the power of text sets. So curating a series of sets, multiple sets, multimedia resources, picture books on a particular subject or topic in order to provide those multiple exposures to vocabulary to help students build word networks and knowledge about topics, which would inevitably result in those students seeing the words multiple times and having those necessary repeated exposures in order to establish deep word meanings. And so just one final slide as we continue thinking about the why here. Knowing a word's meaning assists with accurate and fluent word decoding and recognition. Vocabulary or knowing a word's meaning is important also because research has shown that a reader spends less time and mental effort recognizing a word whose meaning is known to them than one that is unfamiliar. So vocabulary knowledge also supports that decoding piece, that sound symbol connection that happens when students are applying their phonics skills to decode words. It also has to attach to meaning. So we need the word's pronunciation linked to its spelling and to its meaning. And this is how words become orthographically mapped, if you've heard the term orthographic mapping, or this is how they become stored for that permanent automatic retrieval. And of course, we want lots and lots of those words because the more words we recognize on site, the more energy can go to fluent reading that results in comprehension. And so just coming back to this idea that knowing a word's meaning is an essential part of how a word becomes a sight word.
When we considered the how of building a student's vocabulary, we looked at Nancy Hennessy's chapter in Multisensory Teaching of Basic Language Skills. And you might recognize her name from the Reading Comprehension Blueprint. She divides word building strategies into 4 broad categories. The first is word consciousness, teaching students to have an interest in and awareness of words, that word curiosity. And that can be through very positive displays by us about the interest and curiosity in words. Number 2, independent word learning. So once students can access text for meaning on their own, they employ strategies to infer and determine meaning. And in fact, this is the prime contributor to developing vocabularies. And it is why reading volume really matters. It greatly impacts individual differences in children's vocabularies, even more so than that conversational language exposure. And so, for example, this might include building a student's morphological knowledge so that students can independently solve word meanings. Next, we have incidental on purpose instruction. Given the sheer breadth of the words that students must learn, it isn't possible, obviously, to intentionally teach them all. However, incidental on purpose instruction is that brief and quick instruction that occurs in the moment as words come up. So for example, during read alouds or lessons, and it might be the verbal telling of words, it might be providing a bit of an action that goes with the word. It might interest you to know that in a study by Hayes and Ahrens in 1988, It was found that well-written children's books are better for learning new words than the conversation among educated adults, simply because of the sheer number of rare content-rich words. And doing this allows students to listen to text at their listening comprehension level so that they have access to this academic vocabulary until they're able to read it in on their own. And that can obviously be a great thing for our struggling readers as well as our younger ones. And finally, the focus of this unit, which is that intentional on-purpose instruction. We can only teach so many words thoroughly, and this explicit instruction is not the way that we learn actually most of our words. Most are learned through the other three ways that we've mentioned. However, explicit instruction of some words is absolutely essential. Intentional on-purpose instruction is the direct teaching of individual words. Okay, so, given all of that, how on earth do we decide which words to teach? So our giveaway book, Bringing Words to Life, helps to guide us in determining which ones are the most important to focus on. And it might seem intuitive to teach the most difficult words we encounter in text, but in fact, we want to choose words that provide us with the most instructional bang for our buck and are useful across a variety of text and subject areas. And we're going to show how we did that within the context of this unit. We want to consider importance and utility, words that are characteristic of mature language users and appear frequently across a variety of domains. Their instructional potential, words that can be worked with in a variety of ways so that students can build those rich representations of them and connect them to other words and concepts. And finally, words that appear more often in print than in spoken language. And so the words that we're focusing on then through this instruction are called Tier 2 words or academic rare precision words. We're going to have just a brief review of the three tiers. Tier 1 words are those everyday words that we tend to use often in conversation. So for example, family, house, dog, red clock. Tier 3 words are low frequency words and they tend to be related to content or domain. And we can teach kids how to solve and look for clues for meaning. So for example, through morphology. And finally, the ones that we want to focus on through our instruction are Tier 2 precision or academic words. And again, this is where we want to spend that bulk of our instructional time. They are sophisticated and wide-ranging words of high utility, and we tend to see them more often in written language than in hearing and conversation. And one of the tests that you might use to consider if a word meets that Tier 2 criterion, because it isn't black and white, it's quite gray, if it might be to see if a student has a word already in their vocabulary to help express concepts or ideas related by a new word. And this might suggest that they have the means of building more precise or mature language to build or to use to refer to those ideas. So for example, merchant might be considered a Tier 2 word for students if they understand the word salesperson, shopkeeper, store clerk to use in that explanation. And we just wanted to remind you, because there's a lot of vocabulary for us as adults as we do this learning, that despite having the same names or labels as the tiers in MTSS or multi-tiered system of supports, those tiers are not the same thing. Nellie, you're muted.
Of course I was, thanks. So in keeping kind of in the back of our minds that those descriptions of what Tier 2 words are, we thought we would share with you, and this is divided over 2 slides, this chart where we had to actually create this chart for ourselves to start, as we were getting into the work, to start tracking which words we were choosing or debating. And so it chose this chart, it shows the 2 vocabulary words that were chosen for each read aloud text. So for each Important Canadian. And we really did this to kind of make sure that we were thinking across every individual. We were looking for connections, repetitions. And when we were doing this, we noticed that many of these individuals, of course, share similar traits. And you can hopefully see that in some of the choices that we've made. But we also think it's super helpful because we know that, knowing a word used for one person can help support understanding of other words encountered throughout the unit, even though there's no specified sequence in terms of an order in which, we need to learn about each of the Important Canadians. And we hope also that this will help build that network of words that students will be able to understand and use. So these are the first 5. And we can go ahead and show, yeah. And then here are the next 5. And as you can see, there are many connections that can be drawn from the tier 2 words chosen across the various individuals. And as you're taking a moment to kind of read through that list, thinking about those being words that come up in written language, that come up across subject areas, and overlap and connections between words such as dedication, courage, determination, and so on. In the follow-up portion, after the comprehension questions, as we've mentioned, you'll find the word work section, which includes an explicit vocabulary routine for both of those words, as well as an activity which will either be called making choices or an antonym activity, and that's for every word. So, before moving on, we always want to remember that we know our own students best. And so this can be a really long stretch of time. There could be a lot of sitting. And so feel free to break it up over the day or break it up over more than one day. And just always remembering that, we have that option to use our professional judgment to make decisions that work best for our specific context. So first, let's just talk about the explicit vocabulary routine. And this is what all of them look like. It basically consists of what you see here. So you as the educator would provide the word as it's used in the text. So we would be rereading a portion of the text, a sentence, for example, that the word was contained within, providing a student-friendly definition. And we learned going through this process that this is not always an easy thing to do, harder than you may at first think. Then the educator provides examples or non-examples of the word. And finally, throughout this, there are multiple opportunities to respond, to hear the word, and as well as to use and say the word. And so here's an example of the explicit vocabulary routine for the word determination. And this is from the text about Terry Fox. And so basically, I'm just going to go through it a little bit. In the read aloud you heard, and his determination and courage touched the hearts of people around the world, making him a true inspiration. Say the word determination with me. And so there's an opportunity for the class to say it with you. Then here is the student-friendly example. Determination means you keep working hard towards your goal and you never give up, even when things are hard. And then number 4, we would be providing an example, sometimes a non-example. So you might need a lot of determination in order to climb a very tall or steep hill. And then there is an opportunity for the students to talk to one another, tell a friend about a time when, and a sentence starter is provided there for the students to use should you decide that that's necessary. So we could say something like, when sharing with your friend, I'd like you to begin by using this phrase, I showed determination when and you would have them repeat that back with you. And then always wrapping it up with what's the word we've been talking about, and looking for a choral response. So you can just hopefully have an idea there of how many times in this routine children would have heard the word determination as well as had the opportunity to use the word determination, and not just hearing it from the educator, but also from their peers.
All right, thanks, Nellie. And finally, the last part of the word work vocabulary portion of the lesson is making choices or antonyms activity, as Nellie mentioned. The making choices activity offers a structured way for students to discriminate between sentences that are examples or non-examples of our target word, and a way to use the word using a sentence starter. So one of our target words chosen for Dan Levy was the word create. And you can see during this activity that students have multiple opportunities to interact with the word and to determine if the word is the correct use of the word create. So for example, I might name music. Students would think for a moment, and when prompted, might chorally respond after a prompt with, you can create music, or they might share that with a peer. And of course, if you look at the choices we provided, there is absolutely the opportunity for a lot of rich discussion around the different answers, depending on different perspectives, points of views, and experiences. Some students might say that you cannot create a river, while others might say that you can create a river. Many children, but not all, will have spent countless hours redirecting sand or mud during a rainfall to create a river. And the other final vocabulary activity is that antonyms activity, where students have to choose between our target word or the given antonym, which is a word that means the opposite. In our example here for David Suzuki, our target word is observe. Students listen to examples of situations and have to determine if the example is something they could observe or the antonym, overlook.
And now we're just going to tell you about accessing the unit so that you can use this yourself. So this is what our beautiful ONlit website looks like. You can see resources at the top, so you'll be able to click on the resource library and find it in there. When you get into the folder, you will see the all 10, I couldn't show them all in this little clip, but the 10 folders will be there with the front matter. And then off to the right, you'll see that's what you'll see when you open one. So if you opened the Dan Levy, you would see the Google Doc lesson plan, and you would see the PowerPoint slides. And then on the next slide, we just have our email address. If there is like a factual, if there's a typo or a factual error, when we are ready to, add lessons to this and we're looking for more names and we're looking for more feedback, we'll do a call out for that. For this point, what we're looking for is if there's actually a mistake anywhere. We were super, super careful, but we know that we're all humans and mistakes can be made. So please do email info@onlit.org for any typo or error so that we can correct it. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning or watching this later, whatever the case may be. We hope that you find this unit valuable. Again, any little typos or factual errors, please send to info@onlit.org. And good luck.